you're welcome to turn your camera off for this part, or you can keep it on if you want to. You're welcome to, and for everybody that is out there participating with us, you're welcome to be still, or you're welcome to bring in a little bit of movement if you'd like. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer a song for us to move our bodies a little bit. And one of the ways that white supremacy culture shows up is through our bodies, and it keeps us very stiff, and a lot of trauma is held in our pelvis and in our lower bodies, and we often have this disconnection from our lower body and our upper body. So with this movement, I invite you to just allow your body to move in the way that it wants to, and that might be just, you know, moving an arm. It might be just like moving, like swaying a little bit, but whatever way that your body wants to move, I invite you to do that. And if your body doesn't want to move or it feels uncomfortable, then you're welcome to also, you know, have some stillness or whatever feels comfortable for you. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to ask also if the panelists, I'm going to put this song on, and if you can't hear it, can you just tell me, because sometimes the sound is weird. All right.
I need some healing in my life, someone who cares, like Brandy cares, yes, someone who shares all of the joy of family, one who believes we can be free, yes, we can be free. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Hey. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. I need some incense and some sage, natural capacity to pray. Live off the land, yes. Live off the land. Hey. Lend me some oil from the tree. Give me some lavender quickly. Heal from the pain. Heal from the pain. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul. Mind, body, and soul. Hey. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Yeah. Mind, body, and soul, yes.
Here we go. You know my galaxy was built for you and to fold. I recognize you in these constellations. It ain't complicated. Your prototype is algebraic. You fit my equation. Hold up, John. Let me sing it. I need your body and soul. And I'm done explaining, cause I told you that I want you. Yeah.
Healing in my life. I need some healing in my life. Hey. Healing in my life. I need some healing in my life. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Healing, 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 healing. Mind, body, and soul, yes. Soul, yes. Hey.
then just taking a moment after that to just kind of come back into your body and just feel, how the movement feels in your body, feel how it feels to be in your body right now, feeling how it feels to be in this space with these new people, feeling your body on the ground, on the earth. Breathing. Thank you, Jabari. Nice breath.
I've never started a Zoom meeting with a dance party, and I think that was revolutionary. So thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, I think that's how all Zoom meetings should start. Before we move into introducing our panelists, I want to invite everybody who's present here to we just really want to invite you to create a space of humanness where you are, just allowing yourself to really check into your body, noticing what comes up and what's happening for you. If you have a journal present, that would be great. As we move through the questions, we're going to take a pause between each of the questions that the panelists respond to, so that you can have some time to really, check in with your body and notice, like, do I feel tense? Am I feeling anxious? And what am I feeling in my body in this moment, to just come into more awareness of what's happening for you, and just kind of that practice of us coming into connection with each other. So if you can have a journal present just to track that, that would be great. I think it's a little different as this is set up as a webinar, so we can't really see you, but I'll say it anyway, that you're welcome to, stretch, move your body, lay down, half listen, just really show up to this panel however feels comfortable for you, so that you can, feel safe and connected and really be taking care of your body. And that goes for the panelists too. Like, we really want to center, our humanness and our bodies over everything else. So that's extremely important. I will say that also the panelists are welcome if you want to. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can stay unmuted, and, like, sometimes that's nice, so we can hear each other's sounds and just breath and those kinds of things. But you're welcome not to if you don't want to. I'll name for me, I have 3 kids, so you'll definitely hear people probably in the background, and that's, part of my life as a mother. So I want to welcome all of you too who are panelists, that, like, your experience in your life is welcome here, and we want to center, our space in that way. So now what we're going to do is just introduce our panelists, and we're going to allow a little bit of time for them to share a little bit about who they are, so that you can get to know them. Oh, actually, one more thing before we do that. I just also wanted to mention, if you have things with you that also help you feel safe, like an altar or, incense or oils or things that help you to feel grounded in your space, we also want to invite that you bring that in. I have my altar right here, so that I know that my ancestors are here with me, and that I'm not alone, and that I'm in connection. So I want to invite that for everybody, to really just allow yourself to be fully in this space in whatever way feels nourishing to you. So now I will pass it over to our panelists to introduce and tell you a little bit about them.
I guess I'll start because in the order it looks like I come across next. I'm Marlena Tucker Fishman. I'm a mom. I've lived in Vermont now for just about 13 years. I'm also a co-owner of Zen Barn Farm CBD shop in Waterbury Center. And I don't feel like I have a minute worth of things to introduce myself about at the moment without going over the two minutes, but that basically sums me up in a nutshell. I'm also white.
I guess I'll go next. So hello, everyone. My name is Stefan Gillum. I wear a couple different roles, but I am currently serving as the president of the Windham County branch of the NAACP. Um, and, within that realm, we've been looking at getting more into land access because that's something that I personally find interesting and that I'm personally connected to in my life. So my family's originally from the Deep South, and I grew up closer to that region. And so farming was just something that we did, something that I learned how to do. Same thing around animal care. And so it was just ingrained in who we were as people. Um, and it's something that I'm not seeing a lot of in Vermont. So that's why I wanted to show up to this panel. And I take a little bit more of a structural role in the way that I look at systems. And so that's kind of the way that I have addressed and intersected with food and land access in Vermont. So glad to be here. And yeah, I think that's about it for me. I also don't have a minute, but I feel like I took about a good 30 seconds. Maybe I'll just pass it to someone. So how about I pass it to Candace?
Stefan. Yes, so I'm Candace. Candace Taylor. I live in Winooski, Vermont. I've been in Vermont since 2007. And about myself. I always find these types of questions kind of funny. I guess I will say that I have many, intersecting identities and involved in food systems in many different ways too. First and foremost, as an eater, as a human being that eats and needs that to survive. I'm a homesteader. I am a cook. I am a fermenter. I'm a herbalist and medicine maker. I feel very much like my identity as just a human being is deeply centered around my relationship to the land. And that is one that for me has been influenced in many ways. I would say first and foremost that I'm first generation born in this country. My family immediately has immigrated. I'm immigrated from Barbados, and so on our little island in Barbados, pretty much my mom, my grandmother, my dad, all the people that were the closest to me growing up, and my guardians and caretakers were big time land stewards and still are. Were also, they weren't farmers, and I think that there's a huge thing for me that I do tend to want to talk. I do tend to like to talk a little bit about that, like the distinction between being a homesteader or a subsistence farmer and like farming as we know it, in this kind of country. But my family were, just, they wouldn't call themselves farmers. They had pigs, they had goats, they had chickens, compostable toilets before they were called compostable toilets, and even though I grew up in New York City, they definitely taught me a lot about connecting to the land, especially through food, because they didn't have the relationship to the land in this country that they had as a child or as growing up in their lives in Barbados, because of probably a lot of things that we'll talk about today. So yeah, I feel like that's a little bit about me. I teach yoga. I am a mom, a partner, a daughter. I am a part of an amazing organization called Rebel Women that Naomi is a part of as well. And I was a part of the Radical Herbal Allyship community that I met Stefan and Amber. I have a mentorship program that focuses on urban homesteading from a decolonizing lens that I was a part of with Jabari. And yeah, and I also am in the process of trying to campaign to grow the work that I do on my own urban homesteads to become a center for BIPOC folks to connect to the land here in Winooski. So that's it. I guess I'm passing it on. Maybe should I continue that, or somebody want to step in? A moment of pause to maybe see if somebody wants to step in. If not, I think I will choose Marita.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Marita. I'm originally from Bolivia, the Andes. I came to Vermont 2010. Yeah, so 10 years ago, but to the USA 15 years ago because of family. And I've been in Vermont being part of migrant justice. And just because it made sense to find people that speak my language and I can understand. I come from a long history of surviving dictators and violence with militaries and law enforcement. So coming here to Vermont and first being surrounded by mountains was what I needed. And also keeping the fight, with racism, against racism. And I'm also a mom. I live nearby Burlington, and I've been in different projects with different people here. I'm happy to share the space, and somehow I also got involved in a land project that's just starting, taking over a few other projects in Marshfield, and keep trying to figure out the way to have our migrant community visible and also connecting all our intersectionalities. So bear with me with my English. I make some mistakes with words and prepositions, but I'm really happy to be here. And again, thank you for the invitation. I think I'm gonna pass it to Rick.
Thank you, Marita, and thank you, everyone. It's good to be here. Yes, my name is Rich. Not always rich, actually. I changed it from poor to rich. It's spelled poor in my language. It's R-U-C-H, so I changed one letter. So just, so I grew up in Vietnam. I came to the US about when I was 16. I'm 34 now. And I'm an indigenous tribe from Vietnam, so native people to the land of Vietnam. It wasn't always Vietnam. It was native people before that. And so I'm one of the mountain people tribe, which is currently endangered, of losing our entire culture, and land is like non-existent. People are still fighting for the right to farm land and to own land and to have basic, necessity like food. So I came from a background of hunter and gatherer. I did grow up in the rainforest, and before the toilet and modern plumbing and technology, just it was entirely different world. This is a whole new world. So I am currently living in East Hampton, Mass. I have planned to move to Vermont. Actually, recently joined, like co-founded a intentional community with 7 members. So we just started, we purchased a land in Vermont. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's kind of like a tiny village, which I grew up in a village. So yes, so I'm honored to be here and to learn more about everyone else's experience and perspective, and to share where we've been and where we are. So thank you. I'll pass on to, who else do we? Jabari?
Thank you, Rich. My name is Jabari Jones. I am Black, queer, and have been living in Vermont since 2016. I lived in Vermont several years ago when I was part of the Bread and Puppet Theater Company for a couple of years. So I have a background in art, activism, environmental activism, racial justice activism, creative protest, I'm a professional baker, and I've just gotten in more into the craft of fermenting and gardening, and learning how I'm a grandchild of Southerners and farmers and gardeners, and am a sort of self-taught student of history, and have a particular interest in African American history, regarding land and collectives, cooperative organizing, and how that relates to racial justice, fight for human rights, particularly in this country, and hope to bring some of that knowledge to this conversation and future conversations. Yeah, thank you. And I will pass the ball, if you are comfortable, to Naomi. I think you're it. Yeah.
Thank you, Jabari. And thank you, everyone who shared. My name's Naomi. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her. I'm a parent for sure. Decided to check on my little dude to see where he was. Yeah, so I've been in Vermont for about 8 years, almost 9 years. I'm originally from in and around Boston. I was born in Boston, grew up in and around the city. I have definitely had an urban experience, but my mother's husband also is from New Hampshire, and his family has property in the White Mountains. And so all of my summers were either spent there or on the Cape in Mashpee. And so I have a lot of experience and a lot of love and nostalgia for rural living. And it sort of like carried with me my whole life. And I feel like it has formed or has shaped a lot of the vision that I have for the work that I do now. Right now, I'm what we call a folk herbalist, right? And I say that only because I got to give context to what I do. Really, what I do is I talk to plants, and I listen to plants, and I connect with the spirit of plants, and I find ways to heal myself through and with them. I find ways to find out what they need from me to help them heal, and I co-create with them and ally with them to come up with collective healing for all of us. And I feel like my connection to land is definitely spiritually guided. I'm a student of Afro-Indigenous spiritual technology, and I share what I hear, what I learn, and what comes from my heart with as many people, particularly people who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Most of my spaces are safer spaces for BIPOC community. As Candace mentioned, I offer a 7-month herbal allyship where we hang out together and just like facilitate together and teach each other and learn from each other and just have like a really fucking awesome time with plants. And also I am in relationship with Amber. We have the Susu Healing Collective together. We are co-stewards of that organization, and we're also evolving into a new venture, which much like Candace again, we are now in the space of raising funds to broaden the work, and the hope is to purchase land so that we can farm together. And this farm would be, you know, BIPOC led and BIPOC centered healing space. It wouldn't just be about like the farming, which is so important, right? But it's also about how we show up to land, how we as people of color, have so much to work through, even to like process being with and on land, because most of us come from people who've had land taken away from us or who have been taken away from our lands, been forced to work lands against our will, against our consent, or all of this, right, together. And so we embody that and we carry that in our bodies and we carry those stories in our bones and they come out in different ways. So even just going to land isn't necessarily healing in and of itself, but there has to be space held so that we can move through some of that and reconnect, right? And the land holds it too, right? The land is sovereign. The spirits of the land, they hold it too. And so they need us to be able to show up and do the work. So that's a little bit about me. I'm sort of in a different space or maybe realm right now. So I'm not really sure what else I should say, but I think that's pretty good for now. And I can always say more later. So thank you. I'm gonna pass it to Amber now.
Thank you everyone for sharing, and thank you Naomi for sharing that information about both of us. I am Amber Arnold. I live in Brattleboro and I've lived here for about 9 or 10 years now. I grew up in Boston also, and then lived in Tennessee for a while, and then came back to Massachusetts and then moved to Vermont. I have 3 children. I'm a mother. I am a partner. have a husband, and I'm also the co-steward of the Susu Healing Collective, which Naomi shared about in our new project, the Susu Community Farm. I'm really passionate about creating space where we can start to together build a culture that sees food and housing and land not as commodities or things that people have to work for, but things that are freely given and accessed, as we shouldn't. I don't believe we should have to fight for our needs to survive and our needs to access to these, relationships and resources that are crucial to our survival. I don't believe that it's possible to do any of the work ourselves. And I know that all of the things that we've been able to do have only been possible because of community and because of our relationships with each other, with our ancestors, with everything that holds us. And so I am really passionate about starting to build this culture in Vermont and to reclaim and recenter, our indigenous practices, our connection and our relationship to the land, our ability to heal, and not just, I think my experiences in Vermont as a person of color has been your only purpose is to do racial justice work or to be an activist, and that's your only way that you're allowed to show up. That's the only thing we'll pay you for. That's the identity that has been placed upon you. And so I'm very passionate about creating spaces for us to be, and for us to get to be in relationship with each other and experience being nourished and experience building community, and to decenter capitalism, because I truly believe that, white supremacy and racism are really tools to perpetuate capitalist culture. And so that's really something that I'm passionate about, is shifting that and coming into relationship with my people and starting to build that culture in Vermont where we can experience that. So I'm really grateful for all of the people who are choosing to be in this space with us, and for all the people who are panelists who are choosing to, be vulnerable enough to truly share some of who they are and to take the time to offer that to us and to share with us, because that is a huge emotional labor. And I really honor and respect all of your time and your willingness to be in this space in this way. I know that there's a lot that's loaded with that, and a lot that comes with taking the time to do that. And so I really am truly grateful and appreciative of being able to hear your voices and your presence here. And also just wanting to name that, this conversation is the first conversation of many, and we plan to, this is just the beginning of us showing up. And maybe this is the first time that this has been done in this way, but there have been so many people who have been working towards this for so many years in Vermont, and we are not the creators of anything. We have not started, food justice or racial justice or land justice or anything like that. We're not the first people to talk about this. We are just continuing the legacy of our ancestors and our people who have done this in community for so long. And so with that, I think that we will now move into some of the questions that we have that our panelists are going to answer together. And the first question that we have is, what is it like to be a person of color working with food systems in Vermont and the land in Vermont? What are your experiences, obstacles you've experienced, and where have you seen things open up? And that's kind of a big question. I can also put it in the chat if that's helpful so that you can remember that. And so I'll open it up to everyone.
So should we just take our computers off of mute at this time then? Is that what you had meant earlier?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, because we can just dialogue and we can all just
Yeah.
talk about it and answer. We don't really have to go around and then, yeah.
Okay. So I guess I'll kick it off then, since I, opened up my mouth to ask a question. I don't really believe that there is much of an infrastructure around food, by BIPOC centered food in Vermont, to be honest with you. Just like most other things in Vermont, there isn't much of an infrastructure that respects a lot of those lineages. I think it's also important to note that I can only speak as a person who is of African descent. But I would say that, when our ancestors were brought over and enslaved, my family was brought over in 1700. So hundreds and hundreds before most of the white people got here. Straight from Nigeria, straight over. And those customs and those foods and those traditions were kind of all we had, right? They took everything else for hundreds of years from our ancestors. I'm speaking specifically about the American descendants of slaves at this point. And so when you come to Vermont and you can't even find something as simple as greens in the store, like traditional greens, right? I mean, there's kale, there are things like that, but that doesn't necessarily nourish my spirit the same way that greens does, because I grew up and smelled it, I tasted it, things like that. I would say that there is a lack of infrastructure in that way. And I think that lack of infrastructure really does affect recidivity, and who stays and who goes in Vermont, because you need those food systems to be in place. You need that cultural acknowledgement to be in place for you to remain spiritually to be a part of your spiritual armor for longevity in Vermont. If you don't have it, it's impossible to do business here all the time. It's impossible to live here for 15 years, or I wouldn't say impossible, but it's very difficult to do. And so I think that my answer is actually not one that's policy oriented, but it's just human oriented, in that the lack of acknowledgement of my cultural food and traditions, and even the language that surrounds those foods, does make it more difficult to sustain myself here. And so, yeah, that's kind of that's what I would say to answer question one. Thanks.
I mean, I can only speak as an immigrant here in Vermont. I don't have access to land unless somebody gives it to me. I work with a community that doesn't feel like they own anything. However, they work with the land directly. They work in the food system, and don't have access to have their own. So that's part of, for years we've been trying to be visible, right? And also acknowledge the fact of the biggest violence that you can give to someone is to make them invisible as the indigenous people in this country. So it's been a relationship with the land that I love so much. Part of what I did for years was an art project with gardens, where I was putting root vegetables inside of suitcases. So having gardens there, because as an immigrant, I carry my roots and I root wherever I stay. So I will let the suitcases rot and the roots just grow. And the wonderful thing about it is during winter, you close those suitcases and in the spring you open them and there are things growing. And I didn't need any other structure for creating like garden beds or anything. I will just ask for donations for suitcases. And then when you harvest those vegetables, you have a potluck with friends and you share your roots. And that has been something that I've been trying to do, but it's not possible when you have other people that don't have that access, and also you have to start fighting for other things, and you have to kind of forget what you wanted to do with that and why you started that project. So as an immigrant, I still feel like it's hard for me to have that access to do something with the land, to have my roots rooted here. I'm still carrying my roots. I'm still with my suitcase, ready to leave when I have to, if I can. So I think that's my connection with the land. I'm very thankful and appreciate about where am I right now. I have, clean water and clean air, and I've seen other parts of this country and also in my country when that's not possible. So I'm thankful for being here and growing my kids here, but still feeling in the middle. I don't belong, but I live here. And I think that is kind of the sentiment with a lot of the people I work with in the immigrant community, in the undocumented community, where you're still hiding. You fight, but you hide. You work every day, but still you hide. You're making money, but where are you going to spend it? You send it home, but you're not home. So it's kind of that relationship that I can share.
I think I can share a little bit, but I've been trying to figure out how I can kind of streamline this a little bit. I feel like for myself, my experience as a BIPOC person or as a Black person in Vermont's food system has been an uphill battle. I want to first name out loud that I come at this from the experience of being a Black person that is light-skinned, femme, queer, child of immigrants, so first generation, but I also am educated. I also have, I have a mixture, of both access and privilege within our culture of oppression. And I also have identities that do not have access or privilege in this culture of oppression. And in a state like Vermont that is predominantly white, very white centered, it has been hard. And so I'll say, again, just repeating the kind of lanes of the food systems that I've participated in and been a part in of, again, as a grower, as someone who is a homesteader, who cares for animals, grows foods, grows plants that are for medicinal purposes, but also grows plants and tends to the land and existing, little piece of this land that I have access to on a daily basis in its own wild growths as well, and trying to support even the birds and the animals that live around here and things like that. So I come from that lane, but I also come from the lane of being a cook, someone that's been a cook, a caterer, a food educator, who centers cooking foods and teaching about foods from an ancestral lens, from a decolonized lens. Then I shift to also being in the world of food as someone who has worked in grocery stores. So I both worked in grocery stores and also cooked in grocery stores, depending on which grocery stores you're talking about. And I'm talking about the markets that tend to be around here in Vermont, very different from the markets I grew up in urban environments like Springfield, Mass, or New York City, where I come from. So again, as a cook, as my own little small scale urban farmer, as someone who knows about what it's like to work in, especially during the pandemic right now, when I was working in the grocery stores, the essential work of food hubs like grocery stores and the role they play in our communities, especially when you come to like food deserts and where the grocery store is at and where they are not. And Winooski was a food desert until not that long ago, when we got a organic market that is still very much not a market that is accessible by the demographic of the people that live in Winooski. And I worked at that market. So I know. So I just want to say that it's not been easy. It's not been easy to get seen. You talk about invisibility, Marita. I know it's not the same, but there's these overlaps in which, as a cook, how often I've worked in spaces with people who automatically from jump assume, because I'm a Black femme, that I don't know about food, that I don't know about cooking food, that I don't know about food techniques, that I don't know about how to grow food, or even just what foods are, different types of foods. Just constantly always having to fight that upward hill battle of just being able to be recognized and acknowledged as somebody that has something to offer. And then the same type of experience. And this is, again, I've cooked both in restaurants, I've cooked at like big time, like Sodexo style food industries. I've cooked on farms here in Vermont. I've seen what it's like to fight to even get a chance to be seen as a part of this community that's doing and understanding the same types of things, but how many times these opportunities can go to the same white folks, the same white folks, the same white folks, the same white folks. And then these folks are the ones that get put in 7 days, and they're the ones that get featured in news articles, and they're one that get this opportunity and that opportunity. And I'm sure behind closed doors and other offices, they get the, tagged to get access to land, and they get tagged to get access to opportunities to share their thoughts and be featured again and again and again and again, as to be seen, where I'm doing the same stuff, not seen. I know what it's like to work in like grocery stores, and someone who is knows about food, not only as a cook, but as a grower and as an educator, and still get overlooked when there's a question, that I might have an answer to, for a customer. My boss certainly a shit doesn't, but they are the ones that are gone to, and I'm still kind of seen as invisible. Or when I am seen, I'm just seen as less than. So yeah, and then even just as a voice as a voice that is seen as someone that knows about how to at least create or co-create spaces or facilitate spaces for just learning about how to be with the land, knowing about land tending or land stewardship. If you don't have the, kind of the agro systems education, and don't have all the language, and you're not speaking with all these big ass words, and you're not speaking about techniques and ways of being with the land that are basically big agro farming, then again, you're not seen, you're not heard, you're not given a chance to even be on a panel. You know what I mean? I see a lot of these opportunities coming up for me now, only because of what I think is just white guilt. As a response to the shit that's going on in the world right now, especially during this pandemic. I would love to see if this actually is sustained. I'm still disbelieving of the fact of whether or not this is going to be a pattern of behavior that is going to become a part of a paradigm shift, or part of another way in which, white folks band-aid, the issues to try and make themselves feel better. So my hope is that we can actually be on, and my intention is I can only control myself at this point in time. So I'm just going to use whatever opportunity I can when I feel able to, and like I feel like I have the capacity to just be honest, you know, about what my experiences are and not have to filter myself, because I've experienced that as well. So I just want to thank you all for again creating a space where we can share our true experiences. I will say that I want to just finish this one point to say that I do know that I have had opportunities over the years, even though it has been an uphill battle. Those opportunities have all been connected to ways in which I might have randomly known a white person who knew a person who was able to at least give me a shot at being at least heard for an interview or something like that. And so still this need to have white people be these gatekeepers to opportunities, that just feels really icky to me. And I also acknowledge that as a light-skinned person, that it's much easier for me to have had those opportunities and to even be seen in the times when I felt still very much unseen. The few times I feel like I have been seen, I know that, again, it's attributed to the privileges that I have had that still have given me proximity to whiteness. So again, you know, it's still been a very white-centered experience. And so the few spaces like Radical at Herbal Allyship Program, and the few spaces that I've created my own self have been the times that I've had like actual experiences that were centered around Blackness or around BIPOC peoples and our ways of being with the land, our own voices and ways of speaking to that in a way that did not make me feel like shit. So thank you, Naomi, for creating that space. And thanks again for listening.
I think I'll speak to that question from 3 different perspectives. And Candace and Stefan, I feel like you've touched on a few of them as well. In regards to being like a shopper in Vermont in the food system, the struggle is real as a BIPOC person, especially if you want an organic plantain or some good collard greens. It's a travel. I've like gone on hunts just for some organic ripe plantain. Can change the whole flow of the day. And in regards to being seen, my husband and brother-in-law and I, we also own Zen Barn Restaurant. So when I'm there, sometimes just standing there helping operate, people look at you not as you're providing a service to them, but as a server. And that's two different perspectives. And it could be a day when I'm in there totally just to enjoy the space, someone that's in there for the first time, and I don't introduce myself to anyone with my title there, and it's an automatic assumption that I'm there to be their server. What else would my purpose be? And that goes in even other settings outside the food industry, where someone can be in full uniform, and here I am in my jogging clothes, and I'm being asked a question of being a server, as if I'm their server. So I find that very frustrating, interesting, and at times it's also rewarding to be able to say, actually, I can point you to someone of service to you because I'm here to enjoy myself. And then in regards to farming, I grew up in New Jersey in the suburbs, and my dad would always want to keep a little flower garden. My mom was too scared of bugs to even think about it. So once I moved to Vermont, I knew I wanted to like extend beyond his flower garden that he always kept. And we started a community garden with different family members around town. My family was the only family of mixed race or color in there, but it was interesting. It was really an opportunity for me to learn how to connect with the land and soil. And then I found myself, though, also starting to pull back because of the people, great people. I love all the people that were a part of growing on our property and the ones that we initially did it with. But I found myself surprisingly, and I just realized this as we were harvesting CBD, starting to pull back just to observe the white people in the field from up on my deck. I was like, well, this is interesting, and I'm just going to take this in for a moment. And I found myself wanting to connect with the land at my own time, like with my children and my family, and just like Naomi was saying, having time to hear what the soil is saying to me. And and I was really shocked though to have that perspective come up just last week when we were harvesting our CBD. And I happened to be wearing a sweatshirt that said karma on it too. So it was very like full circle light. And everyone that's a part of our team, I consider them all family, but it was definitely a reflective moment.
I'd like to speak to the question, and yeah, I'm grateful for the points that have been brought up, especially appreciate Stefan's and Marlena's point about like the epic search for collards. And it's like, yeah, kale ain't collards. And when your culture isn't being fed, when your culture isn't present, then where are you? You know, the apparent openness of Vermont is deceptive. It's a very cultivated, carefully constructed brand, but then you get here, and I've heard the story like over and over again, and experienced it myself. Like when you get here, it's hard to, if you're a non-white person, BIPOC person, it's often difficult to find people like you, or invisible, or we come out in random times of the year. Like the leaves changing, like, wow, all of a sudden I see all like people of color around. But culture, which is rooted in food a lot of the time, all the time, like food on a very basic level. When you don't see it represented in the supermarkets or the farmers markets, it's hard to feel like welcome here. And there's that is intentional as far as it is the dominant culture, and that's just how it works. And so, access to land or access to like the opportunity to open, say, food businesses, also falls into that. So we see like where's the representation in food businesses in Vermont. And I'm remembering the story from Maria Brigada, who's the owner of Cafe Mama Juana, and how just this summer she had raised more money in, I don't know, a few weeks than she did in like the last several years, after being denied like access to capital, after being denied access to like brick and mortar spaces, denied those spaces. And now all of a sudden this summer, with this racial reckoning or whatever you want to call it, now all of a sudden like funds are just flooding her way, and found a space that actually been bought by a cooperative, and now she's on her way. So definitely there's been a cultural shift. There's been a breakthrough and opening up just this summer. But before that, lots of just very deeply embedded and normalized denial of access, denial of movement, denial of presence for people like us to bring our culture here and have our culture be something that roots us here, that reminds us, oh, we belong here, we're from here, this is home. And that's very significant. And there's a history in Vermont of the dominant culture, so white supremacist culture, is very normalized, in particular like flavor of white supremacy is particular to New England, the Northeast, that either like actively or in a way like passively pushes people of color out because they are made to not belong. and sometimes it's like active and violent, and we see that even today with I look at like Kaya Morris, um, Tabitha Moore, very active, very violent, and otherwise it's very passive, like, oh yeah, we can't keep you alone, no, that storefront isn't available or whatever. I come from food systems as a baker. Moved to Burlington almost 5 years ago and working in the same place until recently, a bakery. And until recently, when they just hired a new chef, it was pretty bland. Like the flavors, the culture is pretty bland. And yet the place is popular, which tells you something. Like that is the dominant food culture. Um, and I think it explains why there's this pressure against embracing particular other food cultures, and then how that affects like who shows up, who belongs, who stays here. All of those things are interconnected. So seeing things opening up in terms of access to capital, even if it's sudden and temporary, shows that there is space, I think, for a cultural shift in Vermont, where being able to stay here, as it's been mentioned, is rooted in food and culture. And so I hope that this conversation and more conversations will serve to continue to like shift this culture, to say like this is like these conversations are critical to like shifting even the language of like how we talk about this. So thank you.
I have to jump off, but can I just add like two little small things before I go, because I don't want to take up too much space. But just quickly, I would say also that it's not necessarily land ownership in Vermont, not necessarily attractive because the way that land is sold and bought here on the shared system sort of thing, where you kind of buy the land but you never actually own it. There needs to be some sort of discussion, in my opinion, that's strategic, that allows for shared BIPOC space, but also allows for people, especially the African descendants of slaves, to actually own something, because it's pretty jacked up that you tell a Black person, honestly, that they can steward a land, but then when they die, they might not have it. It might go somewhere else. And that's been a lot of how land ownership has looked. When I've talked to a lot of folks in Vermont, and that's a lot of white people actually, they say, yeah, we all came down together and we got it, as a group. And then, it just kind of, it's one of those things where it's like, you never actually can say, like, it feels like you can't actually own it in the way that, like, ancestrally, I want to own it, and I want to pass it. And so that's one thing that I wanted to add. And the next point that I just wanted to bring up just before I jumped off is that we also have to try to control the best we can the co-opting of BIPOC movements by the hetero cis like agenda around it, because now all of a sudden, since all of these queer people, myself included, male-bodied and femme-bodied, right? Because we can talk about that later, but there is really no space to talk about the diversity around what it is to be queer and Black-bodied, period, in Vermont. And by Black, I don't necessarily mean it's African descendant. You can be Black and from anywhere. It's really a caste system sort of thing at this point, and we definitely are in it. But there is a co-opting, from what I'm seeing now, of everything that people are trying to do by folk identify as heterosexual. And that intersection needs to be named as well, because land ownership for queer people has always been about safety.
Mm.
And if we move that conversation too far to hetero cis normative, well, we are the ones who are going to sponsor this, we're the ones who are going to control that, then there really is an erasure that happens of queer safety. Because hetero cis people can just go anywhere they want in a lot of those places. And of course, that's a more nuanced conversation, because there's obviously people like George Floyd who was just murdered, So I'm not saying it to be like an end all be all, but there needs to be a contextualized discussion around it within group. Because I've never seen, it's funny how San Francisco and Atlanta is full of fabulous Black gay activists who literally, I mean, Stonewall wouldn't have been Stonewall without the Black community, you know, but there are none here in Vermont, male-bodied, female-bodied, femme-centered, whatever, right? Whatever way we've shown up in the struggle, there's none of that. And so for me, you know, I'm like, if we're gonna do this, we have to do this right, because I definitely don't want to put my Black body on the line so that everybody else who's BIPOC can thrive. And then I'm the one who's left resentful because they're just gonna call me angry. You're just an angry Black person. Well, maybe, because I guarantee you, when we talk about this caste system, that we might be the only ones left on the chopping block. So I think that it's important to have that conversation with Blackness right at the top. Anyway, thank you for giving me the time to just rant that out.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you, Stefan.
Stefan.
Yes.
So nice to see you.
Bye.
I just want to take a moment to speak to a little bit of that, because everything everyone said was so inspiring, and I don't want to take up too much space, but I feel like I resonated with every single one of you. There was so much, from the lack of food. Like, I was just thinking about how I recently grew Sea Island red peas from seed, and I don't even have Gullah ancestry, but when I harvested those peas, when I harvested those black-eyed peas, like, I cried. I was like, wow. And my father's family comes from Mississippi, and you know, there's this whole, like, I don't know my father, but like, there's this whole mythology my mom told me about his family. And so I grew up thinking that my grandfather owned a 900-acre cotton farm in Mississippi. And it just felt so like empowering to think about that. But, you know, getting older and doing genealogy, come to realize he's actually a sharecropper. And so just speaking to like what ownership of land looks like for Black people really resonated with me also. And just the idea that this man spent his whole life and had like, you know, 20 odd children, mostly boys, working this land, all for someone else, all of this labor, all of this blood that literally went into the soil, not to mention the fact that they were descendants of enslaved and trafficked Africans. You know, there's just so much there around what ownership means and what it looks like, and how to reconcile it with, you know, land sovereignty and you know, and native sovereignty, and what ownership looks like in more of like a decolonized or through a decolonized lens. And I like the idea of shared space, which is where Susu really comes from. And what really came to me was, you know, when I was preparing for this, I was like trying to cram, because I'm not actually a food systems person. Like, I don't have any, I'm like adjacent, right? I'm like food systems adjacent. And so I don't hold any knowledge. I don't know statistics. I don't have facts I can pull up for you. And so, but then I was just like, what am I doing? This feels like I'm like, you know, tapping into like, you know, some of those white supremacy culture pillars, like worship of the written word and perfectionism and all of these things. And, you know, one of our other collective members, Lisa, happened to pop in while I was doing this, and she was like, speak from the heart, just be yourself. And like, okay, I can try and do that, even if I don't sound as educated, you know, does that even matter? But I was thinking about how I don't even like the word food systems, and how like I feel like the word food systems is inherently flawed, and that how can we speak about racial justice in a food system if food systems are, there's no justice there, there's no equity there. Because I'm really thinking about foodways, and I'm hearing you all speak to ancestral foods and your foodways, and like how that nourishes you physically, right, as food, but also spiritually and culturally, and how we carry it with us, like Marisa was saying, you know, and how we create art from that, and how everyone's eyes lit up thinking about plantain and collards. And I was thinking about mustards and peas and, you know, like all these beautiful things that sustain us in way more ways than just the way food can sustain a person or a people. And so, yeah, you know, there's a lot of barriers. And I think part of the barriers is even just taking apart the language and really speaking to what nourishes us, speaking to what sustains us. And I'm so grateful to be here and just hear from all of you and just absorb all of this knowledge. So thank you.
I actually wanted to say something. I know I spoke already, but it's in my mind, so I hope I can say and then I'll try and be a little bit, and then I'll try and get off just to create space for more voices. But the piece that I really wanted to share about was also about the way, I love that you said ways just now, Naomi. I put ways of doing food work on my notes, especially as a cook. So like, I think about, so for example, I was a judge, for example, one year for the is it the Master Chef Junior or the food? No, the Iron Chef Junior competition that happens here, where they're teaching youth or young people in the schools about how to cook food and prepare food. Even the rubric that is used, for how to teach food still comes from a very Eurocentric rubric. This is the ways these young people are being assessed and taught about how to be in relationship with food and how to also make food. It still kind of brings me back to like competitions like Master Chef, for example, where they always talk about like elevating the foods that you make. Is still code for whiteifying, the foods that you make and which foods are considered above. This is the whole point of oppression. When I teach about oppression, I always have to start from the point of what is one of the key things that oppression does. It separates us. It creates a who has and who does not have, who is of worth and who is not of worth. And you get these categories, and then some of us hold a lot of the of worth categories, and some of us have a lot of not of worth categories, and some of us have multiple, or a lot of us have multiple by now. And just the ways in which, like, again, it's kind of like the ways these things are taught, the ways ways in which food is made. So as a cook, again, working in food spaces, I've never wanted a restaurant myself, because there's no way for me to have a restaurant in a way that I would want me to have myself to have a restaurant. Well, there is, and I have plans for that, but there's no way like that's acceptable, like, or mainstream, or a part of like, the ways in which everything else is done around food businesses that you were speaking to, Jabari. I've had that same experience that Maria has had, and I've spoken to you about that as well. I want to cook food slowly. I want to prepare meals, with deep intention. But when you're on a line, cooking for Sodexo at a university, or on a line, cooking in the tiny ass kitchen in the back of the grocery store, everything's about how fast and how quickly and how much you can pump things out, and how the stress and the anxiety, the trash talking that's going on, and the violence that's going on behind scenes in kitchens, that's all getting into food. That is all like getting infused into the food that you're eating. And I never wanted to be a part of that. It's never how I wanted to make food. So when I was the head chef in kitchens, whether it was on the farm that I cooked on every summer in Johnson, or when I was cooking as the head chef at a private school here in Vermont, where I was the only person in that kitchen cooking for all these high schoolers, I prepared food. Or when I cook for retreats or yoga experiences or other different things, like when I cook for Rebel Women and we gather people of color to do healing experiences, I'm able to prepare foods the way in which my ancestors prepared foods, at the pace at which feels honoring of my own self, but also nature. And it's a like in direct opposition to capitalism and the pace of capitalism and the pace at which we like to define like what's, a good chef in the kitchen is the one that could like chop things really fast and, pump things out, as quickly as possible. And those are the ones that get celebrated because of the fact that what is governing that pace, what is governing that space, even if you're still getting a farm to table experience, if that's what's happening in behind the scenes on that line, to me, it's missing the point. You know what I mean? Of what it means to be someone that's trying to at least sell the idea that you're being with food in a way that is rhythmic and honors that pace of nature. And so there's a lot of stuff that happens, behind the scenes, and also the same thing happens in which we, so when again, the ways in which we're doing business too. Like, so when I think about as someone that used to cook for farmers markets, as someone that wanted to, that had my own pop-ups, as someone that wanted to 7 years ago open up an urban farm here in Winooski, you know, that centered BIPOC peoples and worked, you know, with BIPOC folks and would grow our own foods and do the things that we're talking about that we're missing, you know, I was met with time and time again, the like, no, there's no demand for that type of a space here. That type of a space won't be successful. Sorry, I can't invest in that because I don't see how it's of worth, because you don't see anything but how much whiteness takes up space. It just hoards all the opportunities, all the resources, and we get like sprinkles of resources when there is so much that's available. So I just wanted to kind of speak to the ways in which I've also experienced that, not only the obstacles, but the pace is also the obstacle. Like, I don't want a restaurant where there's a line and everybody is freaking out back there. And we've got folks like, where's my order? Why isn't it out in 5 minutes? You know, and all of that stuff that's like being around food that to me, I want to like be a part of decolonizing, dismantling, you know. And so now all of a sudden I revisit like opening up this farm. And now again, after all of this, I think, what is it? Is it Jabari that said the white reckoning? Now all of a sudden I have resources that are coming into me. But it also, as much as I feel grateful for it, it also feels like a slap in the face at the same time, because it's like, where were y'all 7 years ago? I could have imagined like, if I had this space already up and running with all the shit that's going on right now, how I would be able to be, or how this space would be able to be already able to meet the needs and hold space for my people in a time, especially in the middle of a pandemic, when we are really, really grieving and hurting, you know? When there is so many opportunities that have come to fruition in Vermont, it's like the same version of the same thing. But we can't have, you know, we can't have Cafe Momohana. We can't have me cooking Caribbean food at the farmer's market without having to literally spend hundreds of dollars just to get a table. You know what I mean? So as far as I'm concerned, I always jokingly say this, but I don't jokingly say this. If you're Black, if you're Indigenous, if you're a person of color and you want to do anything, as far as I'm concerned, this culture should just be like, what do you want and what do you need? Here it is at this point. I think that there's no need to be fighting for this stuff anymore. And that's what I think is the direction that we need to be heading in. So I just wanted to share that piece too, that there's a real way in which all of these things are done too, that I just struggle with, that I would love to be able to speak to as well as a group, like how, and I think Susu is a great example of this, because Susu is a space that is actively, you know, doing their work, you know, doing the work, you know, but doing it not at all in the ways in which it's been done in the past, like business as usual, like actively trying to shift that paradigm. And so many of us have that same desire as well, and have been met with resistance along the way, because it's not seen as, like, people still don't even like, sometimes when I would try to explain the work that I did, people sometimes still like either would be like, oh my gosh, you do all of that stuff, I'm surprised, I didn't know that you were capable of that. Or it's like, how is that even going to work? It's not a business the way a business is normally a business. So how is that even going to work? And how are you going to be successful if you're not caring about the bottom line? The bottom line to me is caring about my people. I don't care if I'm like in the red or in the green or whatever the heck that shit is that they're talking about, because I'm not centering money in the ways in which, you know, other businesses or most businesses want to. So I hope I'm making sense there. But there's an element to the food systems piece that I just wanted to speak to around how the pace and the culture of teaching, of cooking, of growing food, even like the ideas of how many farms take up so much land to just grow one fucking vegetable, one crop, you know, like this type of stuff just blows my mind, you know? Yeah, you know, and now that's like the conversation now. It's all about like farms. And I really think that it's important to really talk about like how we can not have a farm, because so much of us don't even have land. So before we are able to get our people to have land, how can we meet our people where they're at and teach them how to grow food on their back porch, you know, you know, in their, you know, like we don't have to even wait for the farms yet. You know what I mean? Let's get towards there, but how do we work with connecting and bridging that gap in ways where we're at right now? That was a ramble, but I hope some of that made sense.
Well, I actually want to share my experience. It's a lot to process and it's a lot to digest, you know. But it's important to hear everyone's perspective and experience. My experience is a bit we can relate, but it's a little different. Just the journey of it in itself. Um, having come from a tribal who live in the rainforest, and before I even turned 10, the rainforest disappeared, the land was taken. More than half of my family members still oversee and experiencing this exact, same oppression. It's quite ironic that I escaped from oppression to finding exact same thing here. It's disappointing. It's heartbroken, and I hope, and I know people are resilient and fighting for it still, tooth and nail. Their life, sacrifice their life and generation of people to fight. But we shouldn't have to fight anymore. I mean, I personally am tired of fighting. We shouldn't continue to fight. We should already have what had been given, and we deserve, we deserve that. I think every human deserves to live on this planet. We don't own this planet. The planet owns us, nor do the planet need us. We need it more than it needs us. I've experienced starvation, after the mountain people, the indigenous people driven out of their land. We had no home. We had nowhere to go, no refuge, and fighting just to be in our own creation that we have made, a community. It was starvation. It was famine. People, died, and so I came here as political refugee and environmental, climate change, climate refugee, political refugee, for reasons that thousands of years, indigenous people across the whole planet still fighting for, and it's just enough. Like, it's enough. We've had it. It's like, can't carry that anymore. It's too heavy, too heavy of a burden. So I came to the U.S. I've lived in Washington State. Again, having never seen toilet and grocery store, the first time I went to the grocery store, I was like, what is this place? Why am I inside this huge building with so many packagings and lights and everything here, and I was like, I couldn't even get myself to eat because I know that my family overseas not eating. They're, being starved. And I remember just sitting on the table and just staring at the food I cook. Yeah, it's a lot. Couldn't just swallow it, It's like, so I started to question, where the heck are these food come from? Who made this food? Do they get paid well? What's on the food? Why are there so many language that I don't know? Like, what the heck is, xylitol? Like, what is this, chemical in there? Why are they feeding people this? And then why are people still starving? And I've worked, at restaurant before, and I've experienced, low wage, like $6 an hour under the table. You know, it's like, how do you live? How do you pay your bill? And you can't afford organic because they're so damn expensive. You go to the grocery store and you look at, you know, the grass-fed beef, and it's like, it's not what you make. If you made, you just, you know, spend it all on that. It's like, okay, I guess we're not eating fancy meal, you know. So it's strange. It's just, it's really fucked with your head. It fucked with my head. For years, I'm still trying to understand this whole system. I've seen experience myself and seen that people have, you know, been abused through the food system. They work hard, you know, all day, not having any breaks, and that's the life that people are still experiencing now here in this country, as well as other countries around the world. You know, especially people of color, people who have, you know, people who aren't white and people who aren't straight. And it just, like, how much more sweat and tear and blood do we have to give, you know, to come together, to unite, to make this place a better place. I mean, this is our home. You know, I plan to move to Vermont with a bunch of our friends, and which something I'm really looking forward to. And I do hope that, you know, things moving toward a right directions, a more like a light, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel. That saying, I'm like, is there? You know, is there? It's like, I work in the cannabis industry, and that's quite, has its own whole, you know, complex. And again, racism doesn't, you know, racism exists everywhere, and I experienced that at work as well. You know, my coworker, my peers who are, you know, have much less experience than I do. I grew up as a farmer, and I'm a gardener. You know, that's my life. That's like food and nature and plants are part of me. You know, it's like I have plants all over my house. You know, it's just like I live and breathe and need them. You know, and I experienced that discrimination. It's like, oh, my voice is not heard, and my experience is not looked at. My resume is not looked at the same way as, you know, the person next to me, just because of my skin color. You know. And with all that experience, it just, this journey of learning about, you know, everyone around me, and again, this new world, this whole new world, supposed to be the world of opportunities and the world of dreamers, and a place that people make their dreams come true. You know, it's not, and it's like, but again, you know, going back to people fighting for what belonged to them and what is sacred, you know, and I admire that. I do, you know, I give great gratitude and a lot of, you know, my energy and to the people and honor them, you know. But again, we should not have to continue to fight this fight. It should already be over with. Yeah, so thank you for, you know, giving me this space and this opportunity to actually express that burden. You know, it is a lot. It's a lot to carry. Knowing that the rainforest is completely destroyed, and I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes that it exists, you know, and I know what it was like to eat food without chemical in it, without toxic chemical in it, you know, not having to experience this eating people's blood. So thank you. I will pass on this time to the next person.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you. I'm with you. I've been there too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, so much for sharing all of that. And I just really want to take a moment for all of us to be able to just sit with this, be able to digest it and just really feel and really take a few moments to just really hear all of those words that have been shared and this experience and not to just, quickly move through that. And so I want to just invite us to just take a little bit of time just to sit with this. And then with this, I will, I'll share something that, you can use if you want to, and if you don't want to, then that's fine too. But I want to invite you, if it feels good for you, just to take your hands and to kind of cup the bottom of your hands underneath your eyes and just cross them and just close your eyes and just feel the warmth of your hands on your face. Feel how it feels to hold your eyes. Wiggle your toes. Just feel yourself. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your body in this moment where you're sitting. Just feeling into the connection between each of us that we all hold. Feeling that pain in these stories and this experience, and that this is not a separated experience, but that this is an interconnected relationship, and that this harm isn't just the harm of the people that are speaking, but this is a harm that is part of all of us, that we all contribute to, that we all hold, and that we're all responsible for. Just noticing how it feels in your body to be in this space right now. Coming into your belly a little bit. We often become separate from our belly. Just start to notice what you feel in your belly. Take a few moments to just breathe naturally, however feels good and natural to you, allowing your body to breathe. And just taking a moment to just process, sit with everything that was shared, and notice how that feels in your body. Notice what comes up. Maybe you feel warmth, maybe you feel tightness, whatever it is that you feel, just noticing how that feels in your body. And if it feels like too much, just wiggling your fingers or your toes and opening your eyes, coming back to the space if it feels like too much for you. When you feel ready, just invite you to slowly, very slowly start to pull your hands away from your face. With your eyes still closed, feeling the difference in the light. Maybe slowly starting to blink your eyes and allowing them to slowly open. Maybe for the panelists, just taking a moment to connect with the other faces that are on the screen, if it feels comfortable for you, if you're wanting some connection. Noticing where your eyes want to look, who they want to connect with. And maybe for all of us, even if you're not on the screen, just kind of bringing your hands to the people around you and seeing if you can, feel them a little bit and connect with them. And I just want to say that I love all of you so much, and I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you and to be in this space with all of you. And that you all mean so much to me, and I just feel so grateful to be able to share these moments with you. And then I just want to invite a moment just to kind of like shake a little bit and make sounds if you want to. Move your body, move some of the energy. I just want to notice that right now it's 5:42. And so we probably have time to move through one more question. And, part of white supremacy culture is something that, Naomi has shared and centered a lot in the Susu and what we do, and it's called culture over policy. So we are not sticking to a rigid schedule or way of doing things. We believe it's more important for us to be able to really share, and if we don't get through all the questions, we don't get through all the questions, and we come back another time, but really just being where we need to be, and that's what's most important. So I think we'll probably have time to do one more question, and then we'll probably leave a little bit of space to close, and then we will come back to probably a part 2 where we can, move through a little bit more, but we're doing this very titrated. And I think it's also important to name that if you're really interested in moving away from racism or white supremacy culture, it's not something that's going to happen like very quickly. And you do this one thing and then check, now we're on to the next thing. It's going to be very slow, and it takes learning about people and how people do things and being open to hearing stories and truths and reality, and allowing that process to take the time that it needs instead of trying to stuff it into a specific time frame. So I'm going to offer our next question. And the next question is around discrimination in funding and philanthropic redlining, and how has that shown up, in your work and the things that you do.
Amber, I was wondering if it might be a little bit more of a connected conversation to wrap up if we ask about maybe support from other orgs. Is that okay? Yeah.
Do you want to ask the question? Okay. As an organization, what can you do to support BIPOC-led orgs and racial food justice? And I will put that into the...
And so for clarity, Candace pointed out earlier that it was really like, how can organizations support us? How can the organizations, maybe the ones who are watching right now, who are listening and who are hearing, what we have to say. What do you need from them to support yourself, to support you, your projects, your work, or just your, to support you?
I think we have different things going on here. We have individuals doing their own, we have organizations, we have individuals part of organizations, individuals part of the projects. Like myself, I come as migrant justice, but I'm not a dairy farm worker. So I'm bringing their voices when I say, like there was a question about co-ops. And we've been trying to put that on the minds of people, like, really, we can have a co-op, we can do this, and people get excited, but then all the fear and everything that comes with not belonging here, it's just like, how? No, I can't. And myself, we stay stuck. There is this project, 160 acres in Marshfield. Of course, the white person is the how do I keep the key?
Gatekeeper.
Yeah, so the gatekeeper, but he opened it up to whoever wants to come and bring. It's just 160 acres to do what we want to do or whatever we want to do. I got involved as a collective there, as an individual, trying to think maybe that's a refugee for the migrant community when people just want to like get out of work, get out of detention center, just have a space to breathe and be, lost in geographically, no, right? But at the same time, it's a place that needs people there. Not only investing money, but investing projects, putting their things there. I want to invite everybody, to see it and and figure it out if you want to be part of it as you want to be part of it. We're trying to not have the white dude deciding what to do, the white people holding the space, telling us what to do. But the reality is that only white people live there right now. So like, it's open to take it and do anything that's going to be collective for a collective liberation that we want.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is like definitely really important. I think yeah, I think it's also important that to name, I think that a lot of times in our culture and in Vermont, what I've seen is that we trust organizations, but we don't trust people. So I noticed, like, before I had a business and I spoke, nobody believed me and there was no validity behind it, anything I said. But when the words are spoken through Susu or an organization, then they're more validated. And it's very important that we start to change that culture, because there are so many people in Vermont, people of color in Vermont, who have a lot of experience, who have a lot to offer and to create in Vermont. And we need to be able to center and support and shift resources in their direction, and not just in an organizational capitalist capacity. I think another important thing that I felt like Candace was definitely naming was around how, like, for so many years, there was no resources or support. And then all of a sudden, like George Floyd, or what white America sees as like a big deal. And then all of a sudden, there's all this support. And what I've seen in where I live is that, like, all of the white led organizations who have operational budgets, who have resources and money, are quickly able to create food programs and initiatives, and the news is coming to like watch them, and like they're doing all this stuff. And then when they don't know stuff about racial justice or people of color, they bring someone in and pay them a little bit of money to teach them some stuff so that they can make more money and monopolize off of that. And I think it's really important that, and then what happens with, like people of color that are just starting to get some resources, even just a little bit, is then, yeah, it puts you in this position where there's this like sense of urgency, or you're having to catch up with all these like giant organizations that have all the money and resources they need, and you're doing everything for free with no no, no salary, no money, no nothing. And so really shifting the resources back into, or not back, but like actually shifting resources is definitely really important. And I think, starting to look at like the way that you're showing up for support, like are you asking people of color to sign on to a grant that you have written so that you can make more money, and then they're like passed a little bit and it makes you look better and receive more funding? Or are you looking to support projects and what they're doing? And I think that you know the funding gatekeeping is very real. And even for Susu, like we recently applied for a tiny grant, like $3,000, something very ridiculous and tiny. And there was so much gatekeeping in this process. And, this is like a Vermont state grant. They didn't even trust that we were a real organization, asked us to send pictures of us, had comments to make about our payment structure, and this whole,
Wow.
literally there is a huge lack of trust with BIPOC led organizations, and there is a huge amount of gatekeeping. And a lot of times, being able to access funds has a lot to do with the relationships you have, like what Candace was saying, like how many white people and what they have resources to, and that's how trust is made. And if funders or people with funding have bias or whatever, that's going to be projected into that relationship, and you're not going to get funding. So it's not um, an equitable thing. So I think that that's another thing that's really important to look at is, like how are you, not how are you using people of color to make your organization more diverse and get more resources and money? How are you actually supporting organizations and people of color and supporting them getting the resources that they need? Because that is true justice. And if your focus is on making more money or looking better, then you're not doing this work, because that's not what this work actually is. This work is really about getting people free, not getting people rich.
I was going to speak to what you said, Amber, about the grants piece. I think grants are trash. I'm just going to be really honest about how I feel about them. And I think they need to go. I think organizations that have these grant funds or money should just give it to people. There should be no arduous, stressful, violent, because I call them violent application processes, because to just go through the process of applying for a grant, it is so white centric. It literally feels like I'm beating myself. Like this, like answering, like it just feels like cut, gash, hit, punch. It doesn't feel good at all. I also recently applied for one grant. Years ago, I applied for one grant from City Market. That was also really arduous. And look who got the funds. Like I could, like the same kind of people that like similar projects, but most of them were white that got that money, or they had like an organization like you were speaking to that like could validate that they were, of resource or of worth to invest in. As far as I'm concerned, I'm all for wealth redistribution and reparations, period. Give us the money and we will figure out how to support our people, because we already know and we're already doing that work. Individuals and organizations, both big and small, that are BIPOC centered or BIPOC led are actually already on the ground doing the shit. We're out here, we doing it. You just hand over the money. And I'll give you an example. Recently, I received a check in the mail. I didn't even apply for anything. This organization basically does, I was trying to look up and see if I can find the form somewhere. They have a form of giving that I can't remember what they call it right now, but they have it, they're grants. And they have people that are like still the gatekeepers of this, of how the money is funneled. But essentially those people that are identifiers basically of folks who, could use this money or these monies, basically get that person's name and address. And then all of a sudden a check appears in the mail, and it's organized in a way where it's a gift. So you don't even have to file for taxes with this money that's given to you. That to me is what I'm talking about. And the thing of the matter is, it can very easily happen. It can very easily be done. As someone who used to work in nonprofits with gender-based and sexual violence organizations that were heavily grant funded, I know the bullshit dance, shuck and jiving stuff that you have to do to just like, once you have the money, if you're lucky enough to get it, then just to be able to be gifted that money, all the stuff you have to do. You have to prove, to quantify, to show that the money that was given to you by these white people actually are doing the things that they think are good for the communities that you serve, which are typically not their own. Who are they to be the judge and assessors of what our people need when they don't even know what our people need, and they actually are the descendants of and living people that are actually causing the harm in the first place. So I struggle with that stuff. I think grants need to go. I think all that money just needs to get given. So I'm all about reparations, but I do want to say one thing about reparations, because recently there is this bill or whatever that's being passed in Burlington for reparations. Be really careful about the language that is used in these types of reparations bills or reparations legislation or whatever, because there's always this kind of language that is used to help to make it such a bureaucratic process within which to be able to have access to these funds, that they actually have to prove that you are descendants of African enslaved folks before you're able to have access to reparations. Again, if you're Black, you get the reparations. But then what happens to the indigenous peoples of this land? And I do feel like it's really important for me to at least name for my own self that I even struggle with the idea of land ownership in general. I don't feel like anybody owns land. And if we want to really honor the ancestral ways in which we, had a relationship with land, like Naomi said, it was something about like how some of us have been taken from land. Land is a sense of home, its place, its culture, its family, its lineage. So yes, we have an attachment to, and we come from the land, and we are part of the land, and we are responsible for it. But do I feel like I have any right to own it? Even the idea of ownership is colonial. Even the idea and framework within that works is a problematic. But I do feel like money just needs to be redistributed. And I'm not talking about, I also want to talk about how, like you just said, like the distinction between an individual and an organization. I'm not just talking about white organizations giving money. I'm talking about white individuals giving money. And I'm not talking about $20 here and there, but like money that is meaningful, money that you actually have the ability to give. How are you going to invest in liberation? Like really not see this as like a trending kind of commercial thing. This is real. What is the legacy you want to leave truly? Who is it you want to really be? How are you going to invest in freedom and liberation? And if you have resources, share them. That is what I think is really important, because as far as I'm concerned, it's a debt collected at this point. There's some late fees that have been going on for generations. There is some interest. If you want to talk about in the white language, we are owed. We are owed deeply.
Candace, I don't want to cut you off
So
because
that's
you are
it. Sorry about that.
Fire. I just want to make sure Marlena gets a little, before we end, I want to make sure Marlena. No, friend. You were like on fire and I loved it. But I do want to make sure we get Marlena's voice in.
I'll just tag on really quick to add on to about them just redistributing resources. Also, if they're looking for resources, don't just Google whatever it is that you're looking for, but put Black or in front of it, because a Google search won't bring you to a Black-owned business or a BIPOC business. So put that descriptor in front of it and actually seek out resources from Black-owned BIPOC communities. That's definitely a way to help. And if you like the service or the product, share about it. If you don't like it, keep it to yourself. Yes. Bye, Black.
Well, thank you, everyone. We have like 1 minute left. So I just want to, thank everybody, all of the panelists, and thank you to all the people that took the time to listen to this conversation. And I think that's also a step of something that you can do, is to, keep showing up, keep listening, keep, being in conversation, building community, starting to, like, if you don't know how to do it, that's okay. You don't have to be the one to do it. Just be part of, be part of the culture we're building, and just show up in the ways that make sense for you and be in community with us. And so I hope that we will definitely be having more of these conversations and creating more space for us to talk about you know, all the different aspects and intersections that this exists, because it's not an extractive experience or way that we can really do this work. There's so many intersections and ways that this connects. So yeah, I really appreciate everyone who is able to share and be part of this and be vulnerable in this way.
Just to close the circle, offering gratitude to all of our ancestors who walk with us this healing path. Thank you for showing up here, holding the space with us, for offering your wisdom, your teachings, guidance, and love. Thank you for your resilience and all that you pass down to us. Thank you so much to the original people of this land who continue to model how to be in right relationship. And may we do justice to them and figure out ways to be in right relationship with Black liberation, with Indigenous sovereignty, with land sovereignty. Gratitude to the essences of all the elements who showed up here and who show up within us, to the East and nature, to the West and mineral, to center and earth, and to north and water, and to south and fire. And thank you so much to each and every one of you for the vulnerability and the authenticity and the honesty and the truth and the fire. Thank you so much. Ashe. Ashe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Love you all.
Love you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Till next time.
Until next time, there will be a next time.
Yeah.